Hi, everyone. I want to start by reading this poem by Rumi. It's called A Pilgrimage to a Person. It says, when you are not with close friends, you're not in the present. It's sad to leave the people you travel with. How much more so those who remind you of God. Hurry back to the ones protecting you. On every trip, have only one objective, to meet those who are friends inside the present. If you stay home, keep the same purpose, to meet the innermost presence as it lives in other people. Be a pilgrim to the Kaaba inside a human being, and Mecca will rise into view on its own. Muhammad on his night journey wanted most to see the beloved's face. The angels in the other world were secondary. A young man, a new student, is building a house. His teacher walks by and asks, "Why are you putting the window in this direction, my son?" He says, "To let light in." The teacher says that should not be primary. Your deepest desire for a window should be as an open, empty place through which to hear the call to prayer. To me, is the empty place is that rather than striving to build up, like, get rid of this neurosis or defect that I have, or like build up this asset, you know, to let the light in, I first have to have an empty place to where that light can come in. So by doing whatever practices it is that I do, those things, or whatever practices it is that you do, those things will fall away naturally on their own. So I really like in the beginning where he talks about those who remind you of God only looking to see the innermost presence as it lives in another person. And he says there, when he's talking about the pilgrim and the Kaaba inside a human being, and Mecca will rise into view on its own, he's saying if you can see that truth in others and in yourself, then the rest of your life or your being will unfold on its own. You'll realize the truth on your own without having to strive for it, but just by opening up your own being and seeing things how they already are. By emptying yourself basically means to me that, so basically on a normal basis, like, who I think I am really doesn't exist, but I think I'm this ego. So on a normal basis, I'm filled with all these attachments and all these thoughts and fears and inadequacies that I've structured in my own sense of self by, like, all these thoughts that I identify with, all these ways of being. And I very rarely am living from my soul, like, or my heart, or whatever you want to call it. I'm very rarely living from the place where I'm one with you. And that's why we talk about in this, he talks about seeing that presence in another being, because it's very rare to be able to look at somebody without seeing their personality and just seeing their personality, right? It's very hard to look at them as, unless you get used to it, but looking at another person as a soul or a spiritual being. Like, I used to have a teacher, and he used to always say, you're not a physical being having a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience. And if I could remember that, then I don't get so attached to the individual personality or, like, their issues, right? Because usually that's all that we see in people. I don't see who they really are. I just see who I think they are and who they think they are too, most of the time. And by viewing through that way in the mind, I keep them stuck and I keep me stuck. So by seeing, like, the soul or the presence in another person, that doesn't mean, or in any animal or any being, it doesn't mean that we don't function like normally in the world. And it doesn't mean, like, that I can't see, that I think that I can't function with their ego, or that I can't talk, because, like, obviously that's how we identify and function in the world. But what it does mean is, like, I'm not so attached to just that plane of reality, and I don't take it so seriously, and it doesn't mean, like, not sincere, but I take it sincerely, but not as seriously, so I could see that whatever issues somebody's going through, whatever pain they're having, or whatever pain I'm having, or whatever joy or sorrow any being's going through, I know that even though they think they're caught in it, and I usually think I'm caught in it, I know that really the deeper part of their self, and I'll use the word soul for it, is untouched and is okay, and like is going through those karmic predicaments for a reason. Whether or not, even though the ego doesn't understand that, because the ego really is just like an endless set of interconnected thoughts that isn't really real at all, but we think it's real. Like we think that we're really real. So by by living in that way, what I really wanted to talk about in the beginning before I opened this was like how that could help me to live in harmony with the universe. So as we talk about, like I was talking about, the Tao Te Ching talks about the way of things, or you could call it God's will, or whatever, but most people here would call it living in harmony with God's will, or living in harmony with the universe, right? So, which you're kind of always doing, even though you think you're not. But there's two ways to look at it. Like, one way you can look at it is like everything's God's will, which ultimately it is. But there's also that like living in harmony with the flow of the universe, or with like the way of things, or fighting against it and not living in harmony with it. So if I think, and that's why like the Buddhist teachings have helped me a lot, like not thinking of yourself as like a fixed or separate entity, because ultimately you're not. Like ultimately, and if you look at like subatomic particles or energy, it's all just energy that's moving, and it just appears like static and fixed to us. But like we're the same energy as like the rest of the universe is too. And like we're all just the same subatomic particles moving around, but we think that there's a us, which is very difficult to not think that way, because that's the way that it's disguised, that's the way that it seems. So when I think that there's a me that's not the world but is separate from it, that's in here, like I came into nature, or like I came into the world, like that's what we think. So we think that we have to dominate it and control it, and that it's stupid, basically, that the rest of the world is unintelligent. Thinking I'm a ego by living as my ego and fully identifying with it, which doesn't mean that it goes away when you don't, but you don't cling so much to like your rational mind, like your thoughts. So I don't cling so much even to my thoughts, whether they're spiritual or whatever. It's better, of course, to replace good thoughts with bad thoughts. Like that's a step in the process. Like it's better to place, like they call it like a Sattvic mind, but like a more generally good qualities with bad qualities. But ultimately, you don't want to get caught up with any of your thoughts. It doesn't mean you don't have them and they don't function and like they don't serve a purpose, but like you don't take them for the all and only ultimate truth. Just like we realize, like we take our senses, and we still do, even though there's like scientific evidence and like physics that shows now like these subatomic particles, and like we can barely see, like there's so many different light rays that we can't see, and sounds we can't hear, and this and that. So like why would there not be like other planes of being and like realities that are why would we be able to see it all with our senses when they're so limited? And even though we know that, and like even science has proved that now, in our daily life we still usually live as like, if I can't see it or like feel it, or if I can't think it rationally, it doesn't make sense, and it probably can't be. Even though there's tons of like things that refute that. And if you look at like miracles, like even if you go in the Bible, and like Jesus' miracles are like tons of like beings and saints in India and all around the world for all history, like it's not that they were doing things that were impossible. It was just that since they're living in a different plane of consciousness, like a different level of reality, where like that can be done, where all matter and energy is interchangeable, where you could do those things. Like they're living in the infinite mind, not stuck in the rational mind. And it's okay that we're not, obviously. It's not just like, it's just how it is. But as it brings a lot of fear and insecurity, because I think that I'm separate from the rest of everything, basically, and I'm like this little thing in this massive universe. And then that's scary, because it's like I always feel a sense of inadequacy or worthlessness, or like the futility of it all. So it actually lowers by being so ingrained into like defining my model of myself and like wanting to know that I know who I am and like I'm exactly this and I stand for this and this and that. All those models I try to uphold actually is takes away my freedom and makes it tougher on me. Where like if I could stand back and not get so caught in this, and whether you develop that awareness through intellect or through service or through prayer and meditation or like whatever your process is, or you just nothing and you just develop it and you just see it for how it is, or remember it, more better to say, you actually as a being, I am more free that way. And I'm actually, it's not that I like think I'm no different than anything else. Like it's not that I lose my individuality. On this plane, I'm actually more free because I'm not so caught in my roles, and I'm like more free to, back to the thing, like the way of the universe, the harmony of the Tao. I'm more free to flow with nature and like be different, like, because people attach so much significance to like, you got to be the same from this moment to this moment to this moment, right? Like I stay on, this is how I am all the time, and like we take pride in that, right? Where really, if you look at having no fixed self, like you could change based on the energy you're in with you, could change it based on whatever situation you're in. You don't have to be the same person all the time. You don't have to be stuck in the same thing. So like if I'm with these group of people and I know this is how they behave, and like I can enjoy that with them and be that way. If I'm at a temple meditating with swamis, I could go to a temple and meditate with swamis. If I'm hanging out at the bar playing pool with some friends, I don't have to get, I can get stuck in my model of like the person that meditates at the temple with the swamis, and then I feel, oh, this isn't, like I shouldn't be like this, or like be guilty or something. Or I could just realize like, okay, the interconnectedness of all things, like this is where I'm at right now, and like do what you're doing and like see what you can get out of where you're at and what you're doing. Because there's like, I'll finish with this, kind of want to go too long, but I'll get more into this another time. But like, so you have free will, right, on this plane. Like you see, whatever, I'm choosing to do this, I'm choosing to make this video, right? But if you look back from like a broader perspective, that's also mixed with like the perfection interrelatedness of all things, like how like karmic tendencies, like how all things lead in, all acts lead into the next act. Like, and they talk about like you know, in the Bible, like Jesus talks about like God not knowing the, you know, even knows the number of hairs on your head and stuff like that. And they talk about in other texts like not even a leaf moves, but that God knows about it and is directing it. So everything that goes out, it's all interrelated and it all affects each other. And when you look at it as like just energy, that makes a lot more sense, you know. And when Wayne Dyer does the commentary on the Tao Te Ching, he talks about how when a butterfly flaps its wings, energy travels thousands of miles. So like everything we are and do, all that energy extends, excuse me, all that energy extends outward, you know. So it's like, whether for good or bad, your being affects a lot more than it affects a lot more than you think it does. And there's a lot more factors coming into play in like your decision making than you think there are, you know. And even from a psychological perspective, like psychologists understand that like each thought and each thing leads into the next one. So like if you had a broad enough perspective and you were looking at someone, you could actually see into their mind, you could see what they were going to do next. You know, if you could watch somebody from a broad enough perspective and like their train of thoughts, if you had that intelligence, you could see like, oh, the next thing they're going to do is go on there and go on a bike ride, you know. So it's important, but it's not that we don't have free will, because we're also, you know, we're also all the energy too. So it's not that it's being done like, it's not that there's a me that it's all being done to. Like there is, but I'm also the one doing it all too, you know, because I am all the energy.